Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Kristen Baird-Adams, Senior Vice President and Managing Director for PNC Bank and member of the City Club Board of Directors. It is a distinct honor and privilege to introduce today's speaker, Ohio State Senator Peggy Lehner. We welcome Senator Lehner at a critical time for education across the country in the state of Ohio and certainly here in the city of Cleveland, where unprecedented levels of public-private collaboration have our community poised to, over time, overcome the challenges that we face and capitalize on the opportunities before us. The goal is quite simple, and it's a goal we have for our own children, and that is best prepare them for success in school and life and connect them to a path towards the jobs of the future, recognizing that those jobs, the vast majority of those jobs, will require some form of post-secondary education. The path to get there is a challenging one, particularly as Ohio lags most other states in educational attainment. The good news, and looking across this room and seeing all the partners here reinforces this, there is a widespread recognition that this must change. At the same time that one of the most critical factors to our success is recognizing that our success largely rests on our ability to ensure that every child has an opportunity to access high-quality preschool education, regardless of family income. Here in Cleveland, we are very proud to report that that is the unwavering focus of Pre-for-CLE, an unprecedented collaboration that is increasing such access across the city. This issue is very close to our hearts at PNC, where over 20 years we are investing $350 million across all our markets to also ensure such access to preschool-age children most in need. Senator Lehner, you have been a great champion of this great work, and for that we thank you. As chair of the Senate Standing Committee on Education and vice chair of the Finance Subcommittee on Education, Senator Lehner has been at the forefront of these issues and many others, often leading to bipartisan solutions. This includes her critical leadership, as many of you in this room know, in gaining support for legislative reforms that paved the way for the Cleveland Transformation Plan, of which Pre-for-CLE is an outgrowth of. Senator Lehner is serving her first full term in the 6th Ohio State Senate District, representing the city of Kettering, where she resides, and the Dayton area. She has led efforts to create state funding for preschool education, worked on efforts to reform K-12 funding, and is a supporter of the Common Core, a set of academic standards of which most of you are familiar, adopted by 43 states, the District of Columbia, and 4 territories. Common Core, it should be noted, was approved by the State Board of Education in 2010, and as many of you are aware, is the subject of a repeal effort at the Ohio House of Representatives. I'm sure we might get a couple of questions on that today. Prior to joining the state Senate, Senator Lehner was a state representative, a member of the Kettering City Council, and has served as chair of the Ohio Ethics Commission. On a personal note, it's not hard to imagine where she got her passion for education. Senator Lehner and her husband James have 5 grown children and 12 grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club, please join me in welcoming State Senator Peggy Lehner.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me today. It is indeed a privilege to be here with you. Getting an opportunity to catch up with a lot of friends that I worked with on the Cleveland plan and in Columbus on a regular basis, and the folks at PNC, I know them well in Dayton, and they've just been absolutely awesome. Please feel free to tweet. I say that because I tweeted for the very first time in my life last Monday. And it was on the Common Core, and I woke up the next day and saw my little tweet was the headlines in the Columbus Dispatch. So that might be my first and my last tweet. But I always really do enjoy coming to Cleveland. This is the city where I was born. But full disclosure, I moved when I was 3 weeks old and grew up in South Bend, Indiana, under the shadow of the Golden Dome. Any domers in the room? Not a one? Oh, geez. I'm not sure that I set foot in Cleveland again for about 60 more years, not to give away my age or anything, but I think my next return to Cleveland was when I came here to work on the Cleveland plan, and gotten to know a lot of you very well. I know from that experience that much of what I will discuss today are the same issues that motivated you to undertake the bold education reforms that you have and that this community has so well embraced. I don't need to tell you that the work Cleveland is doing is tremendously difficult. You are upending systems and rethinking one of the most important things that state government and local communities do together, and that's educate kids. I thought it was just interesting that Kristen mentioned where I got my passion for education. Really had nothing to do with educating my 5 kids. It came much earlier in my life. It's kind of an unusual story, so I think I'll share it with you. I spent much of my childhood living in a school, not just during the daytime, but I slept in the school. And you're sitting there going, what? But my father was a history professor at Notre Dame, and my mother was trained to be a French teacher. There were 7 girls in our family, and I was the oldest. My next younger sister was very bright and taught herself to read at age 3. But she had the misfortune of being born in December. Her late birthday meant that she would not be eligible to start school until well after her 6th birthday. And that struck my parents as a tremendous waste of a brilliant mind. So they did what everyone would do. They started their own school. The school was largely staffed by my mother's friends, all faculty-wise from Notre Dame. And it was in the 50s, so there weren't a lot of rules and regulations about these things. I'm not sure if Indiana even had a Department of Education to authorize the start of the school, but whatever. But it does reflect that what the freedom to innovate can actually do, because today that school is a very fine, prestigious private school that costs like $25,000 a year to go to. And still very much in operation in South Bend. But at the time, the school outgrew the 2-bedroom house that it started in, and we moved several times before landing in the former mansion of the Studebaker family. I don't know how many of you remember the Studebaker cars. Well, this was the family home. In order to afford the school, that building for the school, my parents sold our family home, and we moved into the 3rd floor servants' quarters of the mansion. The laundry chute was in my bedroom, and it ran directly from my mother's through my mother's 2nd floor office to the basement. That meant I could easily eavesdrop on countless conversations where my mother hired and fired teachers, debated curriculum choices, and selected textbooks. But, not surprisingly, my favorite conversations were the confidential parent conferences, especially when they involved my peers. So all of this craziness is what provided me perhaps the most unusual preparation to one day chair the Senate Education Committee. I entitled this presentation Thorough, Efficient, and World Class, not because I intend to reopen the debate about school funding. Rather, I use these words, thorough and efficient, because they are used in dozens of state constitutions to define the state's relationship to education. Those adjectives obviously are important, but what I really want to talk about is world class. That is the standard to which we should be aspiring. That is the standard we have to meet if we want to compete for 21st century jobs. And that is the education we should be giving all of our kids. Man's recognition of the importance of education has been understood from ancient times. History is filled with memorable thoughts about the value, purpose, and rewards of education, starting as far back as Aristotle's proclamation that the roots of education are bitter, but the fruit is sweet. More than 2,000 years later, Victor Hugo said, "He who opens a school door closes a prison." More recently, Nelson Mandela reminded us that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Wise men and women have always understood that education unleashes something powerful. Once received, it's a gift that we never have to worry about losing. It's forever ours, and often it's a gift we then give to our children as well. Quite rightly, education has been called the great equalizer. It is the essential element that promotes and allows upward mobility. Without universal education, there could be no American dream. Central to that dream is that anyone can have it, no matter how humble our beginnings. We're really not oversimplifying when we say education lifts individuals, families, and our society. It can fix a lot of things that go wrong in this world, with us as individuals and in our communities. This steadfast belief in the value of education is the reason that spending for schools is the largest single item in most state budgets. As a nation, our spending on education is the highest in the world, although this includes private as well as public funding. When looking at just public dollars alone, most Western nations outspend us. Since we have traditionally valued education so much, you could reasonably expect that our schools would be among the finest in the world and our children would be top competitors in the hyper-fast knowledge economy, a world where everyone is trying to outthink, outproduce, and outwork the competition. Allow me to read you something from a recent report contained in the Council for the Accreditation of Editor Preparation. Whoever came up with that name should be shot. We will call it CAPE from now on. While some young Americans, most of them white and affluent, are getting a truly world-class education, those who attend schools in high-poverty neighborhoods are getting an education that more closely approximates schools in developing nations. In reading, for example, although U.S. children in low-poverty schools rank at the top of the world, those in our highest poverty schools are achieving on a par with children in the world's lowest achieving countries. Or how about this one? This was in Ready, Willing, and Unable to Serve, a report published under the signature of 89 retired generals and admirals. The Pentagon reports that 75% of Americans aged 17 to 24 cannot join the United States military. 26 million young Americans. Approximately 1 out of 4 young Americans lacks a high school diploma. Not only are too many failing to graduate, many of those who do graduate still lack the academic skills necessary to take their place along others in the workforce or in the military. Many potential recruits still fail the Armed Forces qualification test and cannot join. The test is used by the military to determine math and reading skills. About 30% of potential recruits with a high school degree take the test and fail it. As a country and as a state, we cannot claim to have a world-class system of education, not when so many of our children are being left behind. Last week, I had the privilege of watching my 5-year-old granddaughter, Mary, go off for her first day of school. Mary got on the bus with a light in her eyes that was just radiant. She beamed. I smiled along with her. Her book bag was packed with crayons and pencils, that required box of Kleenex. I don't know when schools quit providing Kleenex. And her carefully packed lunchbox. Mary undoubtedly will find school to be a wonderful place. She'll have terrific teachers, she'll learn on modern equipment, and she'll have a bright, cheery classroom. On that same day across town, another child got on the bus. Let's call her Maya. Maya, too, was starting her first day, but when she arrived at school, she was full of fear. She didn't know what to expect, and in her family, school is where people experienced failure. Her book bag was empty because her single mother hadn't been able to find a ride to Walmart to get crayons, notebooks, scissors, glue sticks, pencils, colored pens, and whatnot, all things that she couldn't really afford anyway. Maya's teacher is nice, but full of fear herself. This is her first day in a classroom. She thought she would start off the day with an art project, drawing a big red heart for the children to take home to their mothers. But when she asked the kids to take out a red crayon, her heart sank. The children looked at her, perplexed. Red? What was that? She had forgotten the warning that 50% of her students might not know their colors. According to the Lumina Foundation, by the year 2020, 60% of all jobs will require either a college education or a meaningful post-secondary credential. A high school diploma will count for very little. Employers will need and expect their employees to know more, to be better trained. If Maya graduates from high school, she will be one of the lucky ones. Research shows that if children are not ready for kindergarten, which Maya is not, they're unlikely to be reading well in the 3rd grade. Reading well in 3rd grade is one of the best predictors of whether children will go on to graduate from high school. Maybe Maya will catch up, but even if she does, there are lots of other Mayas. It is important to never forget that most of the problems that plague our schools are not problems created by the schools. Our teachers can't be expected to fit the social problems that pull so many children down. In too many instances, the disadvantage that children bring to school are nothing short of overwhelming to them and the adults in the building. It's time to quit looking for someone to blame and start working to fix the problems. You here in Cleveland are doing just that, with a vengeance and with vision. We at the state need to help and support you. And frankly, I need your support in Columbus. Not everyone sees what you see or believes what you are doing. The message doesn't always come through. The #1 policy change we must make into Ohio is to ensure that every low-income child has access to high-quality preschool. Initially, I thought you might like that one up here. Initially, this will be very expensive, but the evidence is overwhelming. The return on the investment in preschool for children in poverty is indisputable. Dr. James Heckman, a winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, calculates that the payback through savings in special education, remedial services, and so on is 10 to 1. How many businessmen do we have in this room? What do the rest of you do? Jeez. I want to know if there's a single businessman among the 4 of you up here that wouldn't jump at the chance for a 10 to 1 investment, return on investment. How about all 4 of you? Voluntary universal preschool has the potential of breaking the cycle of poverty in a way that no other public policy can touch. The key is that the program has to be quality and the dosage sufficient. The higher the dosage, the greater the return. When I say dosage, I mean just that. A full-day program is better than a half-day, and a program that starts at age 3 rather than 4 has a 40% higher return. Programs that start with family intervention from birth to 3 are better yet. Incidentally, the United States lags far behind on preschool, trailing most other countries in the world on enrollment, on investment, and on quality. I am thrilled that Cleveland is not waiting on the state government to make early childhood a priority. With the Pre-for-CLE initiative, you are on your way to finding the resources to provide quality at early childhood for your most at-risk children. It is my greatest hope that the rest of the state will follow your lead. You're all very fortunate to have Katie Kelly working with you. I worked with Katie and some others last year, and together we got, was it $46 million total? I think it was. Added to the state budget for early childhood. And she's just absolutely phenomenal. So I'm really jealous that you've kind of taken her away from the rest of us. I look forward to working with you to get 4 Pre-K up and running and properly funded. If you are not already involved in this initiative, and lots of you seem to have free time because you don't work, please get involved. This is really important. Of course, preschool is just the start of a child's educational journey. The progress children make in early learning has to be protected once they start first grade. That will only happen if every child has a high-quality teacher every year. The quality of a teacher is the single most important factor in a child's education, at least among those factors over which we have any control. We cannot continue to talk about preparing our teachers better. We must make significant changes in how we recruit, admit, train, and reward these professionals. In countries with the highest performing students, the teachers generally come from the upper 10% of their college class. In the United States, the average teacher comes from the bottom 50%. One of the first things we can do to ensure that all children have access to a qualified teacher at all times is to raise the admission requirements for our schools of education. Teaching is a profession. It should have the same sort of stringent admission requirements we ask of doctors, lawyers, nurses, engineers, and others. Skeptics like to say, well, yeah, they have high admission standards in Europe, but they also have much higher salaries than our teachers do. Not true. Our teachers are making about what the average teacher makes in most of the countries that are ahead of us in performance measures. There's a few outliers, but in general, they make about the same. So it's not a question of salary. The American Federation of Teachers, the teachers themselves, they represent Cleveland Public Schools, suggest requiring a minimum 3.0 GPA for admission to our state's schools of education, as well as the private ones, along with entrance exams like the ACT, their score must be in the top 33%. I think we should listen to them. As well, our schools of education must do a better job of screening applicants for attributes and dispositions that make for excellent teachers. Teaching is a calling. It is definitely not for everyone, and just because everyone has the right academic qualifications doesn't mean that he or she will be a fine teacher. In fairness to the prospective teacher and the children, we need to know before a student graduates, ideally before they spend 4 years learning to be a teacher, whether or not that they have those personal attributes. We don't have time to talk about all of the changes that should happen around teacher prep, but we need to start really having very serious discussions on that. By the way, the Board of Regents is paying attention to this. One of the things they recently did was change the exit exam, the licensing exam, to a much more rigorous one and required a cut score that doesn't permit 98% of the graduates who take it to pass it, which is what we had before. I'm going to skip over the next session. I was going to talk about community learning centers. I think we might run out of time, but hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that. Community learning centers, which I found out just this week, is something else that you all are doing here in Cleveland. Address the fact that the problems our children face when they come into our schools are serious, and we cannot expect the teachers to take care of them. So a community learning center embeds lots of other services, a medical clinic, a dental clinic, mental health services, lots of things in the school using public-private partnerships. One of the key things to it is that they use Medicaid to pay for all those services. I said I wasn't going to talk about it, but I'm going to tell you one real quick story because I think it's really neat. In Cincinnati, there's a community learning center. It's sort of the gold standard Euler School. They actually have an optometry clinic. And it's run by volunteer optometrists in the community who come in, and kids can go in there and get their eyes checked. Well, the special ed reading class of 14 students went down to the clinic to get their eyes checked. 12 of them came back with glasses. You can't learn to read if you can't see. So that's what the community learning centers are all about, and it's something I think we need to really support. Finally, I want to speak for a minute about efforts to repeal the Common Core. Honestly, I'm not sure I can convey to you how disheartening it has been to watch this circus in Columbus. It would be downright silly if it wasn't so sad. Maybe I'm naive, but I still can't understand how something that was so long in the making, something so strategic and important to our kids, and so bipartisan, has become fodder for political warriors. Ohio adopted the Common Core standards in 2010. Our schools and our teachers have been working to implement them for 4 years. We have spent an estimate almost $1 billion preparing for the Common Core. We cannot pull the rug out from under our schools at this point. The Common Core standards were developed by a national team of highly qualified teachers and experts in the field. These new math and English language arts standards spell out what students must know at every grade, from kindergarten through high school, in order to be ready for college or a career. Not just educators, but Ohio educators had an important voice in the process. President Obama and the federal government were not at the table, let alone leading the discussion. The Common Core does not tell teachers what curriculum they have to use or how to teach. And in spite of what some opponents claim, the Common Core doesn't promote pornography, tear down religion, or collect data on families' politics or religious practices. Critics who have complained that Common Core standards weren't developed in Ohio and are unproven now want to replace it with a set of out-of-date Massachusetts standards while waiting on a new set of standards that haven't been written, let alone proven. Passing this legislation would invite chaos in our schools and set us back for years to come. The opposition to the new and higher standards is clearly politically motivated, and it is driven by misinformation. In poll after poll, if people are told what the Common Core standards really are, they support them. The problem is that opponents have been dishonest about the goal and the specifics of this work. To my and to so many other amazement, they have successfully given a bad name to something that is a national imperative. Ask me how I really feel about it. When people tell you that our neighbor, Indiana, has repealed the Common Core, ask them what the state is using instead. It's Common Core with a different cover. And ask them about Kentucky. An education leader from Dayton was recently in a meeting with leaders from that state, and they said they're rooting for Ohio to follow Indiana because they're confident that our repeal will give them a competitive advantage in the region's workforce. The most important thing about the Common Core is that it recognizes that all children, regardless of the zip code where they live, have the right to a high-quality education. Our expectations and dreams for our poorest children cannot be any different than they are for my granddaughter Mary or your children and grandchildren. Keep up the great work you guys are doing. You are really leaders in the nation right now in education reform for a big urban environment. I'm excited and proud to stand with you, and thank you very much for letting me share this time with you this afternoon. Thank you.
You can have a seat for a second. Thank you very much, Senator Lehner. I'm Dan Malthrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club of Cleveland, and today we are enjoying a Friday forum featuring Ohio State Senator Peggy Lehner. We'll return to Senator Lehner in a moment for our traditional City Club question and answer period. And we encourage you to formulate your questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Television broadcasts of City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. On Friday, September 5th, the City Club welcomes Karen Alderman Harbert, President and CEO of the Institute for 21st Century Energy. For more information about our upcoming forums and our past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. I almost went back to WCPN.org. Oh, there you go. Today's program is the Peter de Leon Forum on Local Politics, made possible by a generous endowment gift from Peter de Leon. Thank you very much for your support. And today's program is also part of our Education Innovation Series, funded by a generous grant from the Nordson Corporation. We thank you for your support. Today's program is also sponsored in part by PNC. Additional thanks. Today, we also welcome guests at tables hosted by many community organizations and corporate partners. Please see the complete list of table sponsors in your printed program. We thank you all for your support. And now we'd like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests and those joining us via Twitter. Holding the microphones today are Marketing and Outreach Specialist Kirsten Pianka and Content Associate Teddy Eisenberg. I'm going to take a point of privilege here and ask the first question, which came in via Twitter from Kate Smith, Ohio. She asks, how do career technical schools fit into finding innovative solutions to our education problems?
That's a great question. Let me just say this is going to be my favorite part of the afternoon because I love to just talk with you. So the question is, how do vocational schools fit into the overall picture, if I get it right? Vocational schools are very important. They're becoming increasingly important. You know, when the Lumina Foundation talks about the fact that by 2020, 60% of people need a college degree or credential. People often don't hear that second part. But obviously every job in this country does not require a college degree, but they do require knowledge and skills beyond that which one normally would receive in a K-12 environment. But our vocational schools, for those kids who know what they want to do, clearly know what they want to do, and want to get started on that before they graduate from college, but want to have the proper training that they need to get the job that they seek. The vocational schools fill an extremely important role, and one that we at the state legislature are hoping to expand. I know the governor talks all the time about taking vocational school down to 7th and 8th grade. I have a little concern about that just because I think most 18-year-olds don't know what they want to do, let alone a 12-year-old. I'm a little concerned that we might box kids in too early, but I think those are things we can work on, and as long as we make sure that there's lots of sort of escape routes and abilities to change your mind, we'd be fine. But, okay.
Senator Lehner, first of all, let me say I appreciated your comments so much on Common Core. The Urban League of Greater Cleveland is having a parent-wide citywide parent meeting on Common Core on September 6th, and I hope you'll be able to drop by, but I'll talk to you more about that.
Okay.
But
I know you guys testified down in Columbus
yes,
this week.
indeed.
So I understand
Yeah, Marsha
you did
Maccabee was there.
a
Yes.
fabulous job along with Eric Gordon, and yeah, I heard great things. Joe Roman, and yeah, the whole Cleveland delegation really shone.
But my question is, I was really moved by your comments, your comparison of the Marys and the Mayas, and thank you so much for such an accurate portrayal of the Mayas. I was very moved by that. You talked about teacher preparation. Where does Teach for America fit into that? Where we have teachers, well, so-called teachers, who have been trained for 5 weeks, mm-hmm. and they're placed into classrooms, usually in urban districts. Talk about that, please.
Well, you know, one of the reasons why Teach for America works is it is full of bright, creative people who are able to be flexible, who have a real desire to be where they are. And I think there's something, the real carryaway we can get from the success of Teach for America teachers, and I think, you know, you can talk about 5 weeks experience, but then you have to look at it and say, the first year, some of them struggle, but the second year, the Teach for America students outperform fully trained teachers. Why is that? And could it be that they're there because they really want to be in that environment and they have the natural ability to be flexible? So what the question that begs for me is, what happens if we take the same people with that creativity, that desire to be in an urban environment, and then we really train them well? We're going to have the best teaching corps we could possibly have. So let's just look for performance, and the Teach for America performance is high, but I think we can even do better, because I think if you combine the two with good training and that same can-do desired attitude, we really end up in a good place. We done?
Senator, over here, as a member of the Ohio State Senate, you're very involved in all kinds of matters involving education. You certainly showed us many evidence of that today. There's an important bill pending in the Ohio legislature that would make it possible and provide for Ohio's public schools teaching the doctrine of intelligent design. Intelligent design basically believes that the earth and its inhabitants were created by a divine authority, some type of a god, entirely different than evolution. The topic of your talk today is Ohio being a world-class education. What can you do to assure that that bill does not become law, that there's no provision in Ohio law for teaching intelligent design?
The legislation that you're referring to is the Common Core Bill 597 that is currently being heard in the House Rules Committee. And upon very careful reading, there were all sorts of sort of hidden little agendas to be found in that bill. One of them was the idea that we should be teaching intelligent design in our classrooms. So I don't see the bill going anywhere. I think the bill is probably going to pass out of the Rules Committee, because the Rules Committee was stacked in order to make sure it got passed. But I do not think the votes for it are on the floor of the House. One of the other little items that was tucked in the bill was a requirement that all literature, well, 80% of all literature or reading materials in a classroom had to be imaginative. I guess that's a replacement for the word fiction. And they had to be written prior to 1970. Seriously. Prior to that's in 597. So even if you don't you don't have a problem with the Common Core being repealed, you might have a problem with that one. Now, the sponsors are claiming that it was a mistake, that it was a typo. But I'm not quite sure which part of it was a typo. We'll probably find out when they amend the typo in committee. So, but that's where that issue of intelligent design came from. It was also in that bill. Okay.
Senator Lehner, first of all, thank you so much for your leadership. I mean, you've been a champion for kids and kids' issues for all of us, and we're really grateful for that. I'm with the Schubert Center for Child Studies here at Case, and we're very concerned about child well-being from early childhood all through the lifespan. And when we think about education, it's not just about getting kids in schools and quality schools, but keeping them in schools. And I wonder if you could speak a bit to what we know more about in terms of kids push out policies, whether at the preschool level and the number of kids who are expelled at the preschool level, all the way through elementary and high school, and how do we keep kids in school, especially kids who need to be there? Any thoughts on that? We'd appreciate it.
Well, I think one of the first things we need to do is get rid of the state's zero tolerance policy. This is a policy that basically says if a child misbehaves or is excessively truant, you throw them out of school. Now, does that make any sense at all? I don't think it does, but I think what it does is it robs a child who is struggling for any number of reasons, whether it's academically or with issues at home or whatever. It robs them of the opportunity to let school be the place that helps them sort that out and work through it. To take any child, frankly, I think there's the only time that it makes sense to me at all to expel a child from school is if the child is an imminent and immediate threat to the health and safety of his classmates. So, you know, if you've got a kid who's bringing a gun to the classroom, you might want to think about at least segregating him for a while from his classmates. But this notion of just sort of throwing kids away because their problems are more than we want to deal with is absurd. So that's where I'd start.
Senator, thank you for being here. I know you're the right person to answer my question. Those of my generation grew up during a period when many situations were parallel to those being, let's say, suffered through today. Poverty, the Depression, money was mentioned in terms of pennies and an occasional nickel. Broken homes were rather rampant. There was no such thing as preschool. Yet disciplinary problems rarely existed. Mm-hmm. Where did we go wrong, or where haven't we gone right to try to understand the differences that exist today?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I know for people who look back on their school days and they said, you know, we didn't have much of this stuff that we're talking about being essential today in our schools, and yet we thrived. One of the differences, I think, is that poverty is very different. Today, we're really dealing with generational poverty. We're dealing with families that have never known anything other than being poor. Their parents have known only poverty. Their grandparents have known only poverty. Poverty in this country used to be largely immigrants arriving here with nothing. They arrived on a boat with nothing. But what they did have were strong family units, values, and a deep appreciation for the value of education. Unfortunately, so many of our people today do not see education as their way out. They go, my dad went to school didn't get him anywhere. My grandfather maybe went to school, didn't get him anywhere. Why should I bother? So that is a big piece of it. You say that you had broken homes were rampant. Statistically, they weren't. You did have broken homes, but where you did, it was often someone had died. The rest of the family there might be an extended family around to try to help them through. But the prevalence of single parents has just skyrocketed. I know I come from Kettering, which is fairly affluent, or at least it used to be a fairly affluent community outside of Dayton. And there was a chart that someone gave us once that showed, I think it was between 1965 and the year 1995, pretty sure those were the dates, that the number of children in our school district from single-family homes had gone from 10% to 32%. In a relatively short period of time. So there have been major changes in social structure, and we have to deal with those. We can't let them be excuses for not teaching, but we have to figure out new ways to deal with those problems. Okay?
Senator, thank you very much. Clearly, it seems to me your passion, your heart, your discerning intelligence in a bruising and difficult environment clearly spring from the heart. And I want to thank you because I think that's exactly, it seems to me, you're a teacher for us and connecting us through your heart for that as students into this very difficult topic. Isn't that exactly what we need teachers to be able to do in their classrooms? So my question is, what are we doing to help prepare teachers? What is the state of the current support, and is it sufficient for not just the curriculum and the techniques, the content that teachers are encouraged to learn, but their professional development for their inner life, for their heart, for the reflective practices that make it possible to do exactly what you're doing with us as students, connecting us to this larger topic. I speak for this because I learned that the National Association of Social Workers has recently incorporated reflective practices into their standards for recertification. Medical education is doing this as well. Are we paying sufficient attention to the inner life and reflective practices of the teacher that's the fulcrum for connecting all these pieces together?
You know, that's a fascinating question. It raises an issue I really haven't given a whole lot of thought about. One thing we do know that differentiates a really good teacher from others is deep appreciation of content. And I don't think that's really just a question of knowing a lot of facts and figures, like a history teacher, for example, as much as it is being able to pass on that passion for history to kids. It's funny, I have a son who wasn't a very good student. Matter of fact, he drove me crazy all the way through school. And he graduated from the University of Dayton with a degree in communications, and I think, I don't know, it was a 2.8 or something, nothing very stellar. And he went off to do a year of volunteer work out in Colorado. He's a great kid. He just wasn't a good student. So he went to do this volunteer work, and halfway through the year, he called me up, and he had his excitement in his voice was palpable. And he goes, I know what I want to do. I said, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? He goes, I want to be a history teacher. I said, how can you be a history teacher? You don't know any history. To which he responded, he goes, you know, I've gotten really interested in it. And I've probably been reading a book a day. He never used to read at all. But he had gotten this passion for reading, and he was reading history. And he was suddenly excited about it, and he wanted to pass that on. And I visit his class. He has me come in twice a year to, you know, spend the whole day just sort of reminding me what it's like to be a teacher. And, you know, the fact that he passes that passion on is so clearly evident. So I think that's somewhat the key to what you're talking about, and it's worth exploring. I said we need to continue to have these discussions about how we elevate the teaching profession. That's such a key piece to it. So thanks for asking that question.
Thanks for being here today. As an occasional reader of the occasional plain dealer,
That's good.
I have the impression a few years ago when state revenues were declining that the governor led the charge to reduce substantially state support for schools and municipalities. Now, when state revenues increase, the governor talks about reducing taxes. Would you either correct my impression or explain how those two positions can coexist and still help to support education?
Katie's laughing at that. Yeah, okay, here's where I get in trouble. First off, I want to sort of defend the governor on one side here, and that's that, you know, during the Great Depression or recession, whatever that was we went through 5 years ago, we're still coming through, the federal government gave us a whole lot of money for education purposes. It was a one-time gift. They gave it to us. When it was gone, it was gone. So when the budget reflected a significant decrease in funding, you have to recognize that wasn't state money we were doing away with. That was money that the previous governor, had put in the GRF, called it, you know, state funding for education, but it really wasn't. It was federal funding. So there's that part. Then we come to the other part. Now, we are doing a lot better. We had $700 million last year in surplus, which the governor, not just the governor, but the Republican legislature was more than happy, and I'm speaking as a good Republican, was more than happy to take and transfer into income tax cuts. I think that was a missed opportunity. If we look at how much money we need statewide for early childhood education, it's about $400 million. Now, I have no problem with tax cuts. Like everybody else, I'd like my taxes cut. But when there's something we can do that has a much higher return and is going to do more for the health and the wealth and the future of the state than to give most people in this room a $50 to a $500 tax cut, we should do it. We missed that opportunity, and I hope we don't do it again. There's talk about further tax cuts. But and I love our governor. I just don't agree with him on this particular issue. So,
Senator Lehner, you speak of innovation of your own parents in creating a school, innovations that are happening here in Cleveland. My question to you is, what can and should the state do to enable greater innovation in education? And I'm thinking of the idea, at least, that there might be children who don't need 180 days in school. Maybe they only need 4 hours a day, 120 days a year. There's other children that may need 8 hours a day, 240 days a year. The state kind of puts a straitjacket to some extent on what happens in education, public education especially. What can and should the state do to make innovation more possible?
Great question. First off, let me just say I don't think there's a child alive who can't use 180 days out of the year. I think they should go all year long, frankly. But school can be a lot more things than just 8 hours in a chair. But one of the problems that we have as a legislature is it is virtually impossible to make laws that apply to different people. We make one size fits all. We do it all the time. It doesn't work. People are different. People's circumstances are different, and that's one of the real frustrations of public policy. How do you make it so it applies to Johnny over here but doesn't apply to Susie over here, because she may need it, they may not need it. You know, the one example, frankly, is preschool. We know that there's a return on investment for providing children in poverty with preschool. It's a 10-to-1 return. If you look at providing my children a free preschool, paid for by the state, there's no return on investment at all. So, you know, how do we say that child over there who needs it gets it, this child over here doesn't? So that's a challenge. But I think we largely handle it through waiver processes. You know, this is what everyone has to do, but you can come along and ask for a waiver, and we do it. I don't think that's not the best way to do it. I don't have an answer for you. I would agree that it is a problem, and we should always be looking for how we can fine-tune things so that they don't impact people that don't need to have that. But that's just sort of the nature of government. Sorry.
Senator, over here.
Over here.
You referenced the Armed Forces Qualification Test. I have a little different take on it. That's a test that has been applied across the nation. If we want to compare achievement of our graduates, tests like that, or tests of various colleges like Ohio State, who test incoming students for English and math, are there. Why aren't such tests used rather than this mania for testing at various levels throughout high school that we spent millions and millions of dollars to institute?
You're absolutely right. We are over-testing our kids. We are. And it's difficult to sort out exactly whose fault that is. the testing mania has sort of come about in a recognition that kids weren't doing as well, as schools weren't doing as well as they needed to. One of the purposes of testing is to actually determine how the teacher's doing. When you look at her classroom, how are her kids doing? So there are valid reasons to test. But what we seem to have gotten into is sort of this cycle of the state requires certain tests, and then the local district requires tests within itself to make sure that the students are ready to take the test that the state requires, if you follow that. If you look at the calendars of most schools, they're testing all the time. We've got to figure this out. We're over-testing. There's got to be ways that one test can be used for multiple purposes instead of a test for gifted students, a different test for special needs kids, a different test. There ought to be a way that we can combine some of those things. The governor, I know, is very concerned about it. I was at a meeting with the heads of both teachers' unions not that long. It was a bill signing, and the governor asked the three of us to come in right before the bill signing, and no one else was in the room, and he turned to the three of us and he goes, "We're doing too many tests. Can we figure this out?" And they were like stunned. That was the last thing they expected him to say. So he does plan on working on this issue, and I very much look forward to working alongside with him because it is a problem. One more?
Today at the City Club, we have been listening to a forum featuring Ohio Senator Peggy Lehner. Thank you, Senator Lehner. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.